Hello and welcome to the Engerati studio. I'm Rob Martin and I'm joined here by Olof Ferenius, who's the Head of Energy and Utilities at Tieto. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to talk about a few things that are front of mind for you and Tieto at the moment. I think first of all, for some context, should we talk about what the real pain points are for utilities as you see them now?
I think we have two main pain points that is actually valid both for the distributors as well as for the retailers. And the first one is efficiency. You really need to be very efficient in your operations. And the second one is customer services. And why are those two so important? Because most of the energy sector, the prices are very low. It's really hard to compete on this utility market. It's a commodity product. So you can't compete on price. So what you need to do is, of course, have a very efficient, low-cost operations, but at the same time, making sure you maintain your customers by reducing the churn as much as possible. And that you will be doing that by high customer services and being very close to the customers.
So as you say, costs are pretty low, margins are tight. So what are utilities doing to increase customer satisfaction and reduce churn?
Yeah. I think on the customer satisfaction side, what is really important to work with is to make sure you're very close to the customer, to understand the customer, and being also able to follow the customer through the customer journey. In a normal energy retailer, electricity retailer, you might have one or two touch points with the customer every year. Of course, that is not enough, and that makes the customer feel very distant from you. And it's not enough just to talk to the customer once the contract is ending. So you need to be with the customer all the time and making sure you understand also the customer, what they're doing and how they're behaving and who is the customer. Many retailers today are not understanding which customers are profitable, which customer needs what kind of product or service.
So if we assume that the old paradigm was that people interact with their energy supplier 4 times a year where they get their quarterly bill and they read the bill and think, I can't remember how much it's meant to cost, but it seems fine. If that's the old paradigm, what would the new paradigm look like?
So the new paradigm is, of course, to understand who is the customer and follow the customer consumer pattern, for instance. If the consumption is increasing for the customer and you have a contract, you should be able to tell the customer that your consumption is increasing, so don't be surprised when your bill this next quarter will be higher, because everyone hates the prices. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, of course, to tell the customer that we see that your consumption is lowering, we will give you a new price, and be open to be lowering actually your revenue. Because then you build trust, and that is important. The other thing is when you have the reactive information, when the customer calls in, or if you use some digital channels, how to be able to serve the customer in a much faster and quicker way. And knowing if this customer that is calling is really a profitable customer. Many energy utilities today don't know if the customer is really profitable. If you have a customer that is calling in every week to ask about things, very quickly this will become an unprofitable customer, and maybe you should just drop that customer and dare to do that. Okay.
And so a part of this is the data collected through metering, of course. It's not just about the rollout of meters, is it? What happens after that?
One thing is very important if you look to customer satisfaction and rolling out the meters is, if you look to it we rolled out the smart meters in the first generation in the Nordics 10 years ago, and now we're into the second. And some of the learnings we have from that is that it's not only about changing the meter from an old one to a new one, and you get the same measuring values, but eventually you get them more frequently. But it's all about what you can do with that information and how to use that information. If you look to the second generation smart meters, what is really interesting is not what the meter is, but what it does. And what it does is that it can bring you a lot of information that you could use into your customer services in order to be much more proactive. Then, of course, is that the question, is that any purpose for the distribution company to do that, because they have kind of a de facto monopoly? But I think they have, and it's also up to the retailers to really require that you get this.
And you mentioned the work that you've done in the Nordics, and I think you've worked with Vattenfall and Fortum and others.
Yes.
Have you had any examples where they've been surprised at the behavior of their customers? Has the data thrown up unusual things that they didn't foresee or they didn't expect?
No, I think one thing that we expected from the meter rollout, the first generation meter rollout, was quite actually a negative one for the for the consumers, which you also try to tell people, and that was actually that the consumption increased once we changed the meters. But basically, it did not change. But since the smart meters are more accurate than the old ones, actually we get better meter readings. That is also something to think about when you do the rollout process of smart meters, that it's not only about shifting the meters, you also need to have a very good process around that. Be talking to the customers before you roll it out, and be somehow informing them that this will happen. It might be so that your consumption go up or down based on that you get a more accurate reading and so on. So it's much more around how to manage the full process, and I think that was a big learning.
And talking of learnings, at this event, most people have used the word digitalization at some point in every conversation so far that everyone's had. Digitalization as an enabler in this field. Talk to me about what you see as the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity with digitalization.
I think the greatest challenge is about legacy. Because many companies are built upon processes that are very old and very cemented, but also those processes are very tied into legacy systems. And you have big systems, but you also have a very scattered system landscape, which means that change in digitalizing and improving is a very large and cumbersome process. So I think that is the biggest challenge. If you go to the opportunities, is really to increase speed and customer satisfaction by self-services, by automizing processes, and that's where we have the really big upside, both on the customer side, but also on the so to say internal efficiency side. Digitalization will really be a great enabler for making sure that you do the automation, and by that you can be faster and have lower cost to serve.
That sounds like a good note to end on. Olof, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us in the Engerati studio. And remember, there are more video interviews available on the Engerati YouTube channel. Goodbye.